Go for throttle up.
What I'm going to do is
Joe.
what I'm going to do is well, here we are live on Facebook right now. So today we have Eric Knudsen and Kelly Korn as our presenters in this edition of Thinking Christianly About Creation. And today we're literally going to bring it to the ground. That is, we're going to talk about more practical ways in which we can live out this theology and live out the kingdom of God in care for creation. And I can't think of better people to lead us in that conversation than Kelly and Eric. They are the founders of Root Simple, which is their wonderful, I guess you call it your blog, or your, how would you describe Root Simple?
Our media empire.
Your media empire, right? And then also they are authors of 2 books, which I think they could maybe tell us about. And anything else you want to remember, Kelly and Eric, that folks who might not be part of the St. John's community may be viewing this as well. So if you might give us just sort of like the elevator speech background on who you all are and the kind of work that you do.
Eric, do you want to do that?
Sure, I think you gave a good introduction there. So yeah, we're the authors of 2 books. One's called The Urban Homestead that was released in 2008, and then Making It in 2012. So we're overdue for a book by a long shot. And those books were kind of practical how-to guides to things like gardening, home economics, cooking from scratch, beekeeping, all that kind of stuff, which came at that time to be called urban homesteading, whatever that means. And that would be another 2 hours to define what that is. But that's a basic background. And then we've, in conjunction with those books, taught a lot of classes. And I used to write magazine articles and things like that too. So that's kind of our background. That sound good, Kelly?
Yep.
Great. Well, then we'll turn it over to you guys then.
Okay. So this is like the shape of today. What I thought we would do is I'm going to read something first. I call it my scree, but we'll call it a lay sermon maybe. Like just 15 minutes of more organized thoughts written down. And then Eric will take over from there for maybe another 15 more minutes at the most. Kind of unpacking and expanding on some of the themes I'll introduce in the first 15. And then, do we have an hour, full hour, or where are we?
Yes, we do. We have, it's 8:58 now. We have about 55 minutes, I think.
Okay,
would be
excellent.
Great.
So half of our time then we can just have for open discussion. And I have a nice poem I'd like to save time for at the end if I can remember to do so. So that's what we'll do. And I'll start. It's so weird. Zoom is weird. So I've got the 2-screen thing going, and our printer wouldn't work this morning, so I couldn't even print out my paper. Okay. So I'm going to start with a couple quotes because that's how, classy writing always starts. And, the first is a quote from the medieval theologian and mystic Meister Eckhart. He said, this is around the 1200s, every single creature is full of God and is a book about God. Every creature is a word of God. If I spend enough time with the tiniest creature, even a caterpillar, I would never have to prepare a sermon. So full of God is every creature. This quote is so close to my heart and my personal theology that I could have skipped putting together this presentation and just played you guys videos of hummingbirds for the next hour and called it done. But I'm a human, so I have to chatter, I guess. The next is gospel reading from, I think we did this last week, Matthew 17, where the disciples could not cure the child with epilepsy. And Jesus does. He's just like, I'll take care of it, you faithless man. It's the cranky Jesus. And and then after he cures the child, then the disciples came to Jesus privately and said, why could we not cast it out? Why could we not cast out the demon? And Jesus said to them, because of your unbelief, for assuredly, I say to you, If you have faith as a mustard seed, you will say to this mountain, move from here to there, and it will move, and nothing will be impossible for you. So, we've all seen the articles, magazine articles, the Facebook posts, the clickbait, the books back in the bookstores when we used to go to bookstores that give you the answers for getting out of the predicament we're in just a few easy steps. It's always a few steps, like 10 steps to green living, 10 things you can do today to save the earth. Even children aren't safe from this. There's a popular children's book called I Can Save the Earth, ! One little monster learns to reduce, reuse, and recycle. It's such a burden to lay on a child, and what few tools you give the child to save the earth with. Can you save the earth by doing 10 easy things? No, you can't. Are we going to assign you a handful of practical things you can do to save the earth today? Well, we'll see. For many years now, we've been teaching people to make changes in their private lives so that they live more lightly on the planet. And like Eric told you, we've done everything, basic vegetable gardening to beekeeping, gray water installation, composting, and we practice these things ourselves. We've tried to be good, but it's not working. Sure, maybe our household has a smaller carbon footprint than the average American household. We've done some cool things. We've taught great people. None of it is bad. Some of it's very good, but none of it has been very effective at fixing what concerns us most, which is saving this small planet from a very perilous future. Despite all our efforts, all the consciousness raising, picketing, opinion pieces, despite Al Gore and Save the Whales and Earth Day and all of that, the earth is in worse shape now than when I was born 50 years ago. We've realized, Eric and I, that you can't remake a rotten system by trying to be virtuous inside the system. You can fight the fight, but the system always wins. It's like, as an example, I always carry a water bottle instead of using plastic water bottles when I'm out. Sometimes I'm caught out without a bottle and I'm thirsty, but I will not buy a beverage in a plastic bottle. That's how very, very virtuous I am. But where does my personal virtue get me? So I avoid using maybe 50 bottles a year at most. And meanwhile, worldwide, 8 million metric tons of plastic are vomited into the ocean every single year. We are on track in just a few years to have more plastic in our oceans than fish. My attempts at virtue with my water bottle are as effective as trying to mop up Noah's flood with a single paper towel. And you say, aha, but what if everybody carried a water bottle? And then we'd all be set, right? That would make a difference. Maybe in theory, but it would never happen. It cannot happen. It is impossible to avoid single-use plastics in our society, no matter how hard we try. So we have to talk about the system. We care all we like, we try all we want, but the truth is the structure of society makes it impossible to do good. And this is true on many fronts, obviously. The last few weeks, America is finally waking up to the fact that our systems of governance, financing, policing, education, you name it, are inherently racist. And we need a complete reform of these structures if we want to achieve justice. Similarly, in terms of climate change, pollution, species extinction, our entire society is ecocidal. I can think of no better word for it. We behave as if there is no tomorrow and no consequences for our behavior. Injustice and abuse is baked into our human systems. We can try to make good choices as individuals, and we should try, but we can't be surprised when we fail. And I think we do have to forgive ourselves for failing. In his book, Capitalist Realism, the author Mark Fisher points out that we are so indoctrinated by our culture that we are literally unable to even imagine a better world. a world different from this brutal dog-eat-dog capitalism that we live under. Fisher quotes Margaret Thatcher driving this point home. She says of our system, there is simply no alternative. There is no real alternative, she said. And she also claimed there are only individuals. There's no such thing as society. And this is key. The powers that be like individualism, they want us to believe that the only power we have is choices we make as individual consumers. They also want us to believe that we are all in competition and that we can't rely on one another. We value our free choice above anything, we are told. As American consumers, we have the world spread at our feet. So let's look at this bounty more closely. How free are our choices? Before COVID, I should say, how do you get to work or school? In your own life, are there reasonable alternatives to owning a car and driving? What do you eat and drink when you grab some lunch at work? Where does it come from? How was it made? Imagine the welfare of the cow behind the burger, the safety of the worker behind the cow, the health of the land that they both stand on. Is there any alternative if you want something different? After work, you go to the grocery store. Can you get what you need and also avoid plastic packaging? You pick up a bottle of detergent while you're there. Do you know what chemicals are in that product? How they might harm you, the air, the water? Is there any way to find out? Back at home, do you have any say as to where your water comes from, where it goes, how your power is generated? Where does your trash end up? We have been disconnected from the earth in the most elemental ways. We don't know where our food comes from. We don't know where our water comes from. We can't live without it, but we think nothing of polluting it. We pollute our water every time we drive. Soil has become dirt. The air we breathe is tainted and out of balance. We know no animals beside our pets. Yet God created this world and in the Bible called it good. And as we learned last week, the word good has overtones of delightful and abundant. Master Eckhart said every creature is the word of God. And I really like that, the idea of God naming each creature into life with a single word. Every plant, every creature, a breath, a puff of sacred breath, and then existence. Yet plants and creatures are being lost forever from this world at an unprecedented rate solely because of our actions. We're silencing these holy words. We're making the world we were given less and less. And the powers that be tell us that change is not possible and we have to put up with status quo. And this is anti-kingdom thinking. We have to think like mustard seeds to move the mountain. We have to think different. You know, the old saw about how the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over and hoping for different results. Well, this is what we're doing now. This system of government, this way of life, this is what got us into the mire. How will it possibly get us out? I think change starts by confronting the dangerous myth that the struggles of other beings don't matter to your own well-being. This fatal fragmentation of interests is a denial of the common good. It is no longer acceptable or even rational to say, I'm not interested in Black people's problems, that's their business. I'm too old to care about climate change. I don't care about education, I don't have kids. I don't care if they chop down the forests or kill all the whales. No, the whale's business is our business. Our neighbor's business is our business. We are in a moment of great social transformation. The Black Lives Matter protests have put the injustices of our society at the front of our national conversation, and I pray to God that good will come of it. And I will add that justice, to be justice, has to flow out like water. There cannot be justice for some people and not for others. And there can't be justice for humans, but not for the rest of the living world, because not because it's not fair, but because it simply won't work. It's all or nothing. We are all in the ark or we are all drowning. We are caught in the devil's snare. We have engineered our destruction in such a beguiling way that we can't think around it or through it or beyond the snare itself. And as much as I am a do-it-yourselfer, I have come to believe that the only way out of the devil's snare is through faith, it's through spirit, because only spirit is big enough to see around the problem. Science will not save us because it was our own darn cleverness that got us here in the first place. Personal virtue will not save us, as I've already discussed. And a wise and benevolent government is certainly not going to step in and save us. We have to save ourselves. We have to see God in creation and in each other and hold all of that close to our hearts and go forward with conviction. If Christians want a way forward in this rapidly secularizing society, if we want to be leaders and not historical footnotes, this is it. We have to draw a moral line and stand by it in defense of God's creation. I don't want to be a bland, do-goody type of Christian who talks about how nice creation is one Sunday out of a year and then go home and do nothing. I want to be part of a community with a big vision, to be like Reverend Dr. William Barber, someone with a big vision, a big passion, and a big tent. And indeed, the Poor People's Campaign supports urgent climate action. And the reason they do is because environmental justice and racial justice are deeply entwined. Who is hurt by severe storms, hurricanes, and floods? Who is hurt by forest fires? Who is hurt by the smog? Where are toxic chemicals dumped? Who is hurt by rising sea levels? Houston, New Orleans, Bangkok, Manila, they are first to go. Who is hurt by water shortages? Who is hurt by water poisoned by fracking and lead? What is the real price of our cheap meat? What is the real price of our cheap clothing? Where does our garbage go when we export it overseas? Who is hurt by our business as usual? The answer is that every one of us is hurt eventually. The whole planet groans under the toll of the damage we have done. But the poor, the young, and the old are hurt first and hurt worst. The rich and the white are the most protected and feel it the least and feel it last. And yet they are the ones who are setting policy, and they are acting as if they are not acting as if their house is on fire. They are acting like they have all the time in the world. And the powers and the principalities which want to divide us and make us think we are in competition with each other, with the natural world. This is the toxic story of scarcity. And this is what Jesus warned us about. They say we can address climate change or we can have jobs, that we can have a functioning economy or we can be safe from COVID, that we can live with a violent militarized police force or we can have anarchy in the streets. These dichotomies are lies. So we are not going to offer you 10 easy things you can do to help the planet, but instead we're going to ask more of you. We're going to ask you to get political and get active and to be perhaps uncomfortable. Back to Matthew last week, we also heard Jesus being stern, saying Matthew 10:34, do not think I've come to bring peace to the earth. I have not come to bring peace, but a sword. I have come to set a man against his father and a daughter against her mother, and etc. And then whoever does not take his cross and follow me is not worthy of me. So sometimes doing what is necessary is uncomfortable. And sometimes change might feel like dying, the collapse of the self and all you know. But meanwhile, conforming to the status quo is very comfortable. And so is procrastination. But these things are killing us. So maybe it is time to pick up our cross. So what can we do? It's impossible to affect national politics, though they absorb us all. But we can be amazingly effective on the local level. So let's do as Father Mark has suggested. Let's make Los Angeles a demonstration project for the kingdom of heaven. This is not a small thing. We are one of the biggest cities in the world. LA is bigger than many states, many countries. If we change our city, we have literally changed the world. So let's build Jerusalem among these dark satanic mills. Let's build a city where children can play safely outdoors in clean, good air, and where the trees grow tall and shady and the birds sing all day in every neighborhood. And let our river be revived and run clear and deep and lovely again. And let all our people be housed and our streets be peaceful and pleasant. Let us live in dignity and harmony with one another and God's creation. We propose as a church that we work together to remake LA. We can start at home though with a few basic things. So this is my how to save LA in 5 easy steps. 1, start paying attention to local city news, especially the doings of the city council and our other elected officials. This is not easy to do, actually. They get away with murder because nobody pays attention to them. It's hard to find news. The best thing you can do is listen to a little local podcast called the LA Podcast, and they will tell you what's going on in City Hall, and they're funny. 2, let your elected officials know you are watching and that you care. Vote out anyone who is not actively trying to save the world. It is that urgent. This is not a drill. Los Angeles politicians are very good at saying the right things while doing nothing. Do not let them get away with it. We will see this playing out with police reform in the coming weeks, and we're going to learn a lot watching it. We will see the sheep separated from the goats. 3, get to know your neighbors. Build neighborhood solidarity by coming together with your neighbors for fun. When we are lonely and divided, they win. Host a monthly get-together of some sort. This is not as easy as it used to be. And under normal days, I'd say, have a backyard cookout or a happy hour, or whatever is suitable for your neighbors. Nowadays with COVID, maybe you just have a front yard get-together, like a front yard hangout. Everybody brings their own drinks. No agenda here, just get to know one another. You'll find that ideas to improve your own neighborhood will rise naturally. If you live in a building, form a renters union within your building. Once you know one another, you can help one another. Once you know one another, you can make things happen. 4, join with your neighbors in projects to show our love for God's creation. Plant trees. Agree that it's okay to have wild front yards instead of lawns. Make your neighborhood a safe refuge for birds and butterflies. Slow down your street so that the kids can play outside again. And finally, 5, add creation to your daily prayers. Pray for the creatures of the sea, the health of the soil, the mountain lions and the monarchs. Pray for that big old tree on your block that shares its shade with you. Pray for whatever comes to mind. They all need our prayers. And that is all I have. And so I'm going to hand it over to Eric for him to unpack and add his voice, and then we'll open it up to questions.
All right. Well, good morning, everyone. I thought I would continue with a few more ideas, expand a few things, and then also tell a few practical stories too. And I wanted to start with my years helping the Los Angeles County Bicycle Coalition. So I was on the board of that. I was an activist and went to many, many meetings, worked on a lot of projects, wrote grants, that sort of thing. Devoted years to it. And the organization's goal, has bicycle in it, but it's really just about making streets safer for everyone. So yes, for people on bikes, but also for older people to be able to walk to the grocery store safely, children to be able to walk to school safely, all in a city that is, historically like a bad actor, right? Traditionally like the poster child for auto-based city. We worked hard, and I want to tell one example of something that happened, which was, if any of you have been on Spring Street, you might notice that there are some green bike lanes. They're special bike lanes painted green. And these were made, I don't know, about 10, 15 years ago. We advocated for them. Finally, they said they would do it. They put the bike lanes in. And then immediately, Hollywood filming companies said, "Oh, these are ruining our shots. So we need to get rid of them." And so then we were plunged into this battle of trying to save these lanes. And this is an example of the way politics works. So we worked hard to keep them. We all came to a meeting of the city council in LA. I don't know if you've ever been there, but it's this massive room. It's actually a lot like St. John's. It's this huge marble cathedral. And we came there prepared to speak. We had to sit through 2 hours of ceremonial handing out of proclamations, on and on and on. What I call, and the city officials are good at this, I call this weaponized boredom, boring the Jesus out of everyone in order to sort of hope that you'll go away. So we sat there and we sat there. Finally, it was our time to speak. And they announced that, oh, you're not going to get to speak because we have a compromise. We've engineered a compromise. So we're going to partially degreen the lanes, overriding the advice of city engineers, actually, of traffic engineers. And we had no chance to speak. And we looked to the back of the room, and there was an official with Film LA, lobbyist for the studios, and he smirked at us like, I won. You didn't get to speak. Then proceeded a surreal confrontation with one of the councilmen who came back to meet us, physically intimidating. It's very strange. So we lost, and we kept losing, and it felt like every time we would advocate for some improvement to traffic, the city would give us some little tidbit, but no real change. And it's completely dispiriting. And I, like so many other activists and many other causes, burned out and quit. I couldn't take it anymore. It was just too dispiriting. I could tell 10 more stories like that one. And then several weeks ago, I woke up one morning before the George Floyd incident, before all the marches that have happened recently. And I realized that all of the work for the Bike Coalition that I'd done had been completely worthless. That until we develop an electoral strategy, in other words, until we throw out these politicians, that we will not accomplish anything. And I think that that goes to any environmental issue, any issue with justice for working class people, for people of color. We need to change our leadership. So we need an electoral strategy, period, or nothing is going to change. So I came to that realization. The good news is that we seem to have an opening now to do that. Things are so bad that people are waking up to this realization. The challenge is going to be keeping up the momentum during these months that we're still in this crazy, probably year and a half at least, that we're in lockdown. But the good news is that people are realizing that things are so bad that we really do need to change out who our leadership is. To that end, I'm volunteering for a city council candidate, Nithya Raman, in Council District 4. And the good news is that even though we're in lockdown now, we can volunteer for good people. We can give them money. You can also text for politicians. You can text from your house. You can make phone calls from your house. There's this amazing software now that lets us all do that. I wanted to also get back to Mark Fisher. So Kelly mentioned the writer Mark Fisher and a really amazing book called Capitalist Realism that I strongly suggest everyone read. One of the things that Mark Fisher was really good about writing about was this problem of individualizing problems in our society that are really about a collective need to get together. So for instance, Mark Fisher talked a lot about mental health this way. Unfortunately, we lost Mark Fisher to suicide because he struggled with depression all of his life. But one of the things that Mark Fisher wrote often about was the society treating depression as an individual problem. So medicating people. So yes, there are, that's true. There are biochemical problems with us. We might need medication. He's not denying that. But we don't talk about the reasons why someone might be depressed in this culture, which promises so much and then fails to deliver, right? So there are many reasons why we all might be feeling depressed, because we're separated from each other, or we're in a job that is alienating, right? Marx talked about a fourfold alienation: an alienation from ourselves, an alienation from each other, an alienation from social groups, and an alienation from the earth, which is what Kelly was talking about. We are alienated from all these things, and this quite naturally leads to depression. That depression is not helped just by chemical treatment or personal therapy. We have to work on a societal level to change that. That's one of the wonderful things about St. John's, is we're in a community with other people, and that is one way of breaking down one of those layers of alienation. But this also applies to things like recycling and composting, things like these are all good things. I'm not saying you shouldn't do these things, but it's not just an individual problem. The same also applies to racism. So one of my concerns right now is that we'll lose the momentum, like in terms of talking about things like police brutality, in terms of talking about giving working class and people of color access to healthcare and to services, and having a sense of equality. And instead, we'll end up with like HR seminars on how to, that'll be turned into an HR problem rather than a societal problem. It's not to say that there aren't HR components of racism or individual problems of racism, but it's a societal problem that we need to meet at a societal and a community level. Kelly talked about false choices, and there's an anecdote I really like that the philosopher Slavoj Zizek likes to bring up, and he likes to joke about when you go in an elevator and there's the closed door button, right? Most of those closed door buttons aren't actually connected to anything. So you press them and you think you're making a choice, but actually you're not really making a choice. Society is making a choice for you. This came up in, I mentioned my work with the Bike Coalition. So, particularly in LA, do we really have a choice about the way we travel in the city? Or do we have a choice more about what kind of car do we buy? That's the choice, not how we travel, or whether we own a car or not, or whether we can own a car or not. It's like pushing that elevator button and thinking we're doing something, but we're not actually doing something. Thankfully, there's some good examples that I can bring up of meeting these challenges at a broader level. So again, important to meet them at an individual level, but also working with other people. One of my favorite people in this city is Yvonne Savio, who used to run the county extension service, which is part of the of UC Davis, but every state has a extension agent who basically their job is to help, twofold, to help farmers get good science-based information, but also to help just anyone who wants to plant a garden. And in most places, the extension agent actually just helps people plant lawns and dispenses lawn advice in cities. But Yvonne said early on, she wanted to help disadvantaged people grow their own food. And so she rebuilt the program to do that. And you could sign up to learn to be a volunteer to help other people plant gardens too. And so many school gardens are the result of this, many gardens in like shelters for women and things like that are the result of her work and her work with other people and volunteers. There's in Portland, there's something called the Portland City Repair movement. On our blog, we interviewed the founder, Mark Lakeman, a few years ago. One of the interesting things about this was groups of people in Portland who got tired of speeding in their neighborhoods, and they just got together and they improved their neighborhoods. And at first they did it without asking the city for permission, but they did it with a broad coalition of people, like young people, old people, and they went out and they painted patterns in the intersections. They built tea houses and things like this alongside. They planted trees. And the first time they did it, the police showed up. But when the police showed up, they saw that it was an intergenerational group of people, and they weren't going to arrest the grandmothers there. And then finally, the city realized this was a good thing. And now they work in partnership with the city to improve neighborhoods. Another nice example. I keep thinking these days about the need for solidarity, the need for us as Christians to think of ourselves as brothers and sisters, the not me, us component of what we need to do going forwards. It seems like that's a possibility now too, both, but with the challenge of we have to do it through Zoom meetings, just an incredibly awkward technology. So it's going to be, obviously not going to be an easy 2 years to build that connection, but we have to do it. We simply have to do it. Lastly, I think I just want to get back to that verse, that passage in Matthew about seeing the possibility of a different world. And it's hard to do that. I mean, I find myself gaslighting myself constantly, thinking like, oh, it's not really possible that we can do these things. It's just not going to happen. It's too hard. But it is possible. There is an opening. That's what Mark Fisher thought there was an opening too years ago. And I think he was right. There is a chance to think of a new economic model that's not based on serving capital, but is instead based on serving people. We have the possibility for that change. We just have to get going, work on it, work with other people, and make it possible. And with that, perhaps we can open it up to conversation. Any thoughts? We've been ranting for a half hour.
Well, first of all, Kelly and Eric, wow, yet again, we have a second week of just sort of really, I don't know what even word to say, challenging, but challenging in a way like that is also hopeful. And insightful too. You kind of get to know there's a sting to it, but a good thing, a good sting. I think that sometimes healing brings a sting, and just the thought that you guys have given us some really wonderful stuff here to chew on and to maybe actually do something about. The one thing, Eric, I think that well, first of all, thank you for your really practical tips that are not just sort of like 10, recycle, but Eric, one thing you talked about was with regard to politicians and electoral reform. How would you suggest that we might is there some good way to learn the record of folks who currently are in city council? Because we all know in Los Angeles, as Father Dan always says, there's in the city of Los Angeles, there's one Queen of England, and that's the mayor, and then there's 10 presidents or real mayors in Los Angeles, right? The city council people have far more power than the mayor. The mayor is mostly a figurehead, and how do you think that we can find out more about these folks on a variety of topics, right? Not, you know, the example we learned about in the social justice committee meeting on Wednesday was, you know, the fact that you can go and you can find out how much each one of them received from the police union, right? And who is and you said they are all equal offenders on one level, but not all of them have taken as much as others, right? So so there's that. But how do you have a way of how do we know the record, and B, how do we find out some alternatives alternative folks? Not that St. John's would recommend who you should vote for, which we can't, you know, as a community, but we sure can know, be informed voters, and we can give our folks the information they need to make their own choices. Do you both have some sense about that?
Yeah, so Kelly mentioned LA Podcast. LA Podcast is hosted by an acquaintance of mine, Alyssa Walker, who is a journalist who I know from the bike activism world, and then two other people. So more has happened in the city of Los Angeles in the past month than has happened in 10 years. It's really astonishing what has happened. I mean, just this week, Jose Huizar was arrested for corruption. There are 3 other people connected, at least on the city council, to this corruption scandal, probably more. LA Podcast has done an amazing job. If you just listen to the past few episodes, they are long because so much has happened. Some of them are an hour and a half, 2 hours. But what has happened is so insane that it's both entertaining and horrifying. Like, I kind of dread listening to each episode of this podcast each week just to know the depth of what has happened. My experience with the city council is that they seem progressive, but they are not. They're answering to large financial interests. They are unresponsive to ordinary people. If you're not a lobbyist, you can, have a discussion with them, but they aren't going to do anything unless it aligns with the people they are answering to. The LA City Council is notorious for this. There was an academic study a few years ago showing that LA is the second most corrupt city after Chicago in America in terms of, these sorts of pay. I know it's hard to measure these things, but in terms of payola and things like that. And they're good at dragging their heels too on stuff. And they're good at seeming to say the right things when they don't actually do anything. They'll just do symbolic little things when they just keep on doing what they're doing. So that's what I suggest. And unfortunately, the way, one of the reasons I'm not writing for magazines anymore is because there's no money in it. So the, social media and things like that have eviscerated the press, and particularly at the local level, no one's keeping an eye on things. And so that's why we have to roll with things like LA Podcasts, which is, kind of done on a shoestring budget, but done by 3 people who have watched city affairs very, very closely. It's impossible to underestimate just how badly this city has handled things like homelessness, transportation, police reform. I could go on and on and on. And the coronavirus epidemic. I mean, the mayor opened things up way before things should have been opened up, and in a way that was haphazard, and now more people are dying. So this is partisan, but I'm also a member of the Democratic Socialists of America, the DSA. They have a nice newsletter. You don't have to belong to the organization to get the newsletter, but it will let you know kind of what's going on locally and people who you might support who would be more progressive. Kelly, you have anything to add to that, or? But yeah,
No, I would recommend listening to like reviewing the protest period on LA podcast it's fascinating. They did several episodes that are like day by day. What happened on Monday? What happened on Tuesday? Because it's a history of all the things. And at the reopening was happening at the same time as the protests, and so much was happening that there was no way to even absorb it. And as Eric said, it pays to even just listen to back episodes. We're all locked up. Why not? Why not do that?
Do it while you do the dishes.
You do it while you do the dishes. Yeah, it's stunning. It's really stunning.
I was thinking about this information about the city council people and what they do and don't, and I've been watching more and more about what happens in Pasadena, and it's just a small version of LA. I used to think the city was reasonably well run, but we have a horrible problem with accidents on 2 east-west streets, and the city's policy is we want the cars to go as fast as they can because the drivers get angry.
Mm-hmm.
So we have cross-town streets that are posted for 35 and people do 50 and 55 all the time, and the city doesn't care. But what was interesting about the information issue is when I listened to William Barber, and if anybody hasn't heard that sermon, you got to hear that sermon. The end of the sermon, he talks about where there are enormous pockets of money that could be available if we had action and a little bit more honest government. If all the people who are billionaires paid taxes, there would be a pot of $40 billion. He talks about $40 billion, $20 billion, $90 billion. So what I want to say is we've been trained to think there's no money to do anything, but there is money. There's tons of money. It's just that a handful of people, selfish, greedy, immoral people control it. But there is tons of, if they built one less battleship, there'd be, I don't know, $60 billion to put into, and I was just shocked but glad to hear that, because everybody says there's no money, and that there is money, they just hide it and hoard it. But we have plenty of money in this country to do anything we want to do to help people who need a fair chance and a decent life. It's there. And it made me so angry when he said that, but he's a smart cookie and that organization are smart. So he's not throwing out possibilities that don't exist. They know from years of research where all this money is hidden away, and they just want us not to know.
Russ,
go ahead,
one
Eric.
quick thing. Russ brings up a few good points. One is this city is 88 municipalities, which is part of the problem. So yeah, if you're not in the city of LA, you should also be involved wherever you are. And then yes, follow the money. And I would say also, I want to be clear, I think it's important to work at the federal level too. So I just both, not one or the other, but both. I'm sorry, go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say that I tried to work for Lorraine Lundquist's election to the city council twice. And I was very hopeful. And they were very hopeful. She was, her opponent was longtime John Lee, who went to Vegas with,
Yep.
how do you say his name? Yeah.
Yeah.
And we're pretty sure that he's probably involved at some level. He's certainly knowing and done nothing. It's very discouraging. And then I go to our local neighborhood council. They are so conservative. Oh my gosh, I could hardly stand to sit there. There was a little contingent of UCCers, local UCCers who were wonderful, United Church of Christ folks. And I've since gotten involved a little bit with their food pantry. But, and they're serving now every day where they used to do once a week. They are now serving, they're giving out food every day. So I feel like I'm so grateful, Kelly, for your comment about you're not going to give us Save the World. You know, when I taught school, that's what you talk to the kids about what they could do. And it's like, really? I mean, teenagers look at you like, really? You know, I'm going to save the world by getting a water bottle. I wish I had had your perspective then. You know, we're going to work where we can. I mean, I probably did convey that to some degree, but we're going to work. Let's work on LA. Let's work. I like the idea of neighborhood gatherings, doing what we can. Anyway, all to say, I'm sorry, Mark Fisher also had some mental issues and gave up and committed suicide. That's very, very sad. I'm so aware that this needs to be, like all these issues, done in community. Needs to be done in community.
And with a spiritual underpinning too, because as you point out, Mary, this work is very hard. So definitely, you know, we need
Yes, I agree.
a faith, a spirit underpinning to it. Otherwise, just burn out really quickly.
Right.
I think Felicia and then Barbara.
Yeah.
I understand what you're saying, and those meetings are interesting. But I really feel like the only way anything's going to change is if we focus on campaign finance reform, because that's the crux of the matter. City councilmen and mayors and our state representatives and all the way up to the president, they get elected because there are groups that donate massive amounts of money to their campaigns, and they need the money in order to run the campaigns. So unless you're able to cut off that spigot somehow and have them run in a different way, then this is the system we're going to get. There's no way to change that because we as individuals don't have that kind of money. In 2012, somebody whose campaign I really respected was Buddy Roemer. And that's because he put $100 cap on any donation that could be donated from anyone. No one could give more than $100. If we don't, as citizens, require our representatives to have a similar kind of cap so that lobbyists can't give more, PACs can't give more than that, so that we can all have equal voices in the voting system, then this isn't going to change. We can talk about it all day, but ultimately they're going to run their campaigns and fulfill promises to people who gave the most money. It's a political payola. It's a pay for play kind of thing right now. And unless we change that, that isn't going to change.
I think there's truth to that. Yeah.
Yep.
Barbara?
Oh, thank you. I wanted to mention something, and it goes to what Russell was saying. But first of all, I have to tell you, my cousin is a Mormon, and this is public, and she might see it. So I'm sorry, Joyce, but I'm going to say this anyway. There was an article in the Wall Street Journal, and it talked about a group inside the Mormon Church who they do investing in companies and that kind of thing. This group has over $100 million in assets. So that means a lot of things in this country, and people don't know that. People don't know how heavily their influence is in the economic life of the country, and that was the point of the article, was to say, look, that they tell you what to do, or they influence things in this way, and so I just wanted to let everybody know, in case you didn't read the article. One of the companies that they are heavily invested in, and I actually like this company, but is Home Depot. So if you go to Home Depot, that's who you're going to see. That's who controls that company. And a lot of other companies in this country. So I just wanted to put that out there for people, just to let you know who is influencing you.
Thank you, Barbara. Philip has his hand raised. I think that's going to have to be our last comment for the day, or a question.
I just want to thank you both for being so validating. There are just a couple of things that, I was reading some James Hillman a few years ago, and he said, he kept going to his therapist and talking about how depressed he was and driving to his therapist's office in Boston. And he kept complaining about the landscape he drove through with all of these industrial things and billboards and roadkill on the side of the road. And his therapist kept trying to get at, does that remind you of being powerless because your father was such a powerful man? And he kept trying to relate it to something interpersonally like that. And then it dawned on him, it's like, no, the landscape through which I have to drive just to get here is so demoralizing and so depressing. And I'm a guy who owns a house, in another part of the town. And I have the luxury of driving here in my own automobile, but that is so confrontive and so overpoweringly demoralizing. And it really made me think for the first time ever that there's a morality to aesthetics. If you have enough money to buy a building and put it up somewhere, you have a moral obligation to make that as aesthetically pleasing and integrate it into that community as possible. And to that end, I'll end with this. I live in Echo Park, and a few years ago, I was at a city council meeting about so much development that was going on here. And I asked one of the developers, I raised my hand and they brought me the mic, and I said, may I ask, where do you live? What part of town do you live in? And the moderator said, why do you want to know? I said, I don't need your address. I just want, what a general area do you live in? And he said, I live in La Crescenta, La Cañada. And I said, why aren't you building up there? There's so much open space up there. Why aren't you developing up there? Why are you developing in our neighborhood? You don't even live here. You have no contact with how this is going to affect us with our standard of living. And someone literally from city council came over and took the mic from me. Like, we don't want to listen to that, And they said to the guy, you don't need to answer that. Just, I'll just go on to the next. It was innovating to say the least. And so it's great to be validated by hearing your guys being in the battlefield with that. So thank you again.
Thank you.
Amen.
Thanks, Philip. Thank you, everyone. We're going to have to, unfortunately, bring this conversation today to a conclusion. I hope next week, where we're going to have a wrap up on these 4 weeks dealing with some of these issues, maybe we can continue this very fruitful conversation, I think, and as we sort of wrap up these 4 weeks and move into to sort of what do we do with all of this. I think we could continue this very good conversation. Kelly and Eric, thank you again. I mean, this was like really very good. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
And I feel both overwhelmed and energized. I'm not sure what that means.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So thank you all again. We'll see you. Remember, today there is one service throughout the diocese, and that is going to start in 10 minutes, led by our bishop, and at 10 o'clock. And then we will have St. John's coffee hour immediately following that. Okay, so immediately following that service, come on back here for St. John's coffee hour.
Bye, everybody. God bless.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.